All right. All right, and good afternoon to you. I greet my students from Riverland today on September 28th. Kind of a mixed bag weather-wise here. Cold and windy. The sun is shining 1 minute and then the sky is spitting up rain. And I hope my Riverland students won't be put off by the idea that today, and possibly hereafter, episodically if I remember, I also want to greet not only you, but the students at Long Prairie Grey Eagle. I haven't explained this yet, but I've got a lot of irons in the fire right now. And I am, I'll just try to explain it quickly because it might not be interesting to you. I'm in deep with concurrent enrollment, like I told you early on. My eye starts itching the minute, of course, and I'm trying to make a vid. And I'm doing so many things. I'm teaching classes at CLC, live Zoom. I'm teaching for Riverland. And I'm also teaching, team teaching, an English course, a Comp 1, at Long Prairie Grey Eagle High School in Long Prairie, Minnesota, for a college and schools kids. And I love that school. And I was going to bring a poet there this year, and I've already told you that. And we've, it's kind of like CIS on steroids. We started it last year. I was the experiment teacher. Pretty quickly, they bumped it a year. Now it's 2023. Higher Learning Commission has decreed that high school teachers need, I think, either a master's or close to a master's degree. And we're trying to get around that because that's, we work hard at that, getting as many transcripts started as possible. So usually I visit once, write up a little report, and I'm out of there. And I usually go and get fish tacos in that town because there's a lot of sweet Latino people working there. But this is different. At least last year I visited 3 times and taught, right, physically. And just to cut to it, we're going to use these videos. Sweet Eric Torgerson at Long Prairie Grey Eagle is going to use these there. And that's how, I think we'll have a little more integrity with it. We use these videos, we use my syllabus, and my name goes on the transcript. And I'm happy to be back at it today. Now, yeah, I kind of owed you a lesson on Friday. But a couple things came up. A bunch of friends came over because it was kind of an almost homecoming there, although the football's canceled along with the rest of the world. So just had some old friends out and about, and we didn't do the best job with social distancing like reported, so I better get this done before I get COVID. And another thing, the lesson that I had on Friday is not essential and also very hard to replicate with YouTube videos. It had to do with me mainly, on the main, processing a series of artifacts of prose by my students after, leaving that disturbing image of my foot in a sandal with a sock on it. And it can't be really done one way. I could show you the paragraphs and we could read it, but the main game was, okay, do you like this or no? And here's why. And I was asking them that even though I hadn't given them yet quite a language for style. So to talk about style. So here's 2 things that I'd like to do today to try to bring you up to speed and help me get everything in sync. It's about 3:30 right now. It takes me a while to make one of these because I'm kind of suck at editing, but I'd like to make this, get over to St. John's and get it uploaded to you by later on this afternoon. And here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to talk about my relationship with a poet named Taylor Mali. And I'd like to tell you some stories about him. And we'll get a Taylor Mali poem in front of you in a moment here. If you like slam poetry, if you like spoken word, you're going to be happy, I think, in a few minutes. And then backing up to last week, usually at Central Lakes College every year, we have something called Student Success Day, which is a day where we cancel all classes, we shut down programming, and we try to get students to come, go to breakout sessions in the morning, and then hear the big keynote speaker that we always hire to bring in and motivate people to be successful college students and maybe eventually university students. I've told you too that it's been many years now that I've given a presentation on procrastination in the Chalberg Theater because I'm a big deal, right? I'm still pretty dope. But last week it was all scaled back, everything was on Zoom, and 300-400 students participated, but it simply wasn't anything like what it's been in recent years. And a little sadness came over me because I love that day. I love that day so much. And it is not because I get to present in the Chalberg a couple times to, whatever, a couple hundred, 250 students on procrastination. But just because it's a great day to build community, which is really important to me. And it feels hard, definitely harder in Zoom. But then last week I thought, well, you know what? You could make kind of a compressed, truncated presentation to your students that you have this year. Everyone has trouble with time. Everyone has trouble keeping up with deadlines. And I'm at least satisfied with that presentation. And I'm gonna run it by you. And I hope you find it helpful. Many students, thousands of students, have found it helpful. And I'm always swarmed after that presentation. I mean, it seems to make people happy. And I've been dialing it in and changing it and adjusting and meddling with it over the years. And I'm certainly giving a different message in recent years than I was when I started it about a decade ago. So before we get to a slam poet, let me tell you a story. Not last year, but the year before, I was responsible had the chance to pick the big keynote speaker for Student Success Day. And I wanted it to be Taylor Mali. And it was a mistake, and I regret it. I don't have a lot of life regrets, but I kind of regret that, and I'll mainly because when he did his thing for the entire school, probably 1,500 kids in a gym. He was really profane. He was pretty naughty, and I was over on the wall just kind of face palming, if we still say that. For me, it was cringeworthy, if we still say that. But what did I do? I brought a slam poet to a college audience. What did I think? It was going to be rated G. And I feel like I said, well, I wished I hadn't done that, but I still am grateful that I met him, and there's friendship between he and I. And it's a relatively simple story. When I picked Taylor Mali up a couple falls ago, again, not last fall, but the fall before we'd even gotten his baggage, he asked me, he said, so I'm one of your verse like water poets, right? I'm going to be a verse like water poet. And I said, well, Taylor, not exactly. I brought you to Minnesota so you could be a big keynote speaker on our Staples campus and on our Brainerd campus for our Student Success Day kids. A lot of people are going to be listening to you tomorrow. And he started getting a little suspicious. And we probably didn't even get all the way out to my big truck in the parking ramp at the big airport before he realized, I don't know anything about slam poetry. Spoken word is just not my thing. And that's kind of the phenomenon of the weekend. He began to suspect, I think, the truth. I'm not a spoken word guy. I won't bring a spoken word poet to my series ever. And it might have something to do with the fact that I'm 60, but it also has to do with the way I think about literary events. I'm about a reading, okay? And so when I bring a poet, I want them to have their books, and I want them to read from the books. But that's not what slam is. Slam is loud, and it's memorized. And for me, it crosses a fine line between performance and the theatrical. And if you know anything about it, it's loud, and there's gestures. There's a hand gesture thing that they do, and young people love it because of that. Because it's loud. It can be profane. It can feel like something's being discovered on the spot, improvisation-wise. And I'm wasting your time with the comment, but too late. It's coming out of my mouth. It reminds me of a few years ago when I went to a mass somewhere in Minneapolis, and the lectors had obviously during the week spent all their time memorizing the readings for the weekend. So when it got to the Old Testament reading, and then the letter of the Psalms, and then the letter of St. Paul, they didn't have the text in front of them. And I sat there going, this is just not true to my dreams of what it should be like. I lecture, I read in my parish. I did it yesterday at an outside mass, and I can tell you, I didn't memorize the readings. I read them in the wind, although it was blowing my pages around. So we get in my truck, and I start heading out, and I'm like, Taylor, you and I have met before twice. You were kind of rude to me too. And then he got nervous. He's like, oh, what did I do? Well, I told him that a number of years ago I was a presenter at the Minnesota Council of Teachers of English. I do that sometimes. I was supposed to do it this May, canceled, and Taylor was hired by the Minnesota Council of Teachers of English that year to be the speaker. But I didn't go. I skipped it because I was nervous about all my equipment working properly. So I went to the hotel, conference room where I was going to be doing stuff, and I just made sure that my computer worked and the microphone worked, and that everything was fine. Just want to make sure I got the right levels here. Looks like everything's good. So then when I got set up, I went to get coffee, and he was in there just bringing down the house, man. I mean, people were just going berserk. And when the doors blew open, the stage was back near where the coffee machines were, and Taylor was the first person out of there. And he comes flying right up to me, and he said, "You skipped the keynote." And I tried to make this joke. I said, "Well, I heard the keynote was going to be lousy." He didn't think that was funny. And I said, "Taylor Molly, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming to Minnesota and helping us with this conference. And by the way, you and I have a mutual friend." He said, "Who's that?" He looked irritated. I said, "Alison Granucci." Then he said, "How do you know who my agent is? How could you possibly know that?" I'm like, "You know what? I run a reading series. I've worked with her for years. And by the way, you're on the internet leaping across her page." Then he whipped out this phone. He said, I'm gonna text Alison right now." "What'd you say your name was?" I said, "I'm Jeff Johnson." So he starts texting her, and he doesn't even say goodbye. He just walks away. He just wanders. 2 hours later, I saw him at the conference, and he went flying by me, and he looked up and he said, "Hey, I got a text back from Alison. She says you're legit." And I felt pretty good. I was walking down the hallway going, "I'm too legit to quit." And I told him a couple years after that, we ran into each other at the American Writers Project. Not he and I, but he was having a conversation with Richard Blanco, who did that big poem about America for the inauguration. And when Richard saw me, he remembered, and he ran up and gave me a shove and hugged my wife and hugged my boys. And Taylor was irritated that their conversation was interrupted and their friendship started. And so I guess I'm telling too many Taylor Molly stories, but I got to tell you one more. That year, I was trying to make sure that my second son could get through St. John's University without borrowing even a penny. That was our goal. So we set fire to like $330,000, not that I'm counting, destroying our financial future to create theirs. And I was teaching this class in Wadena when I hosted Taylor. And so there was such a long day. I had to go get him at the airport and bring him here, install him in the guest house, and then drive up 90 miles up to Wadena to teach a 4-hour class on moral heroes. I'll never do that again. It's not necessary because I got Riverland. And for extra money, overload gigs, as we say. So I told my older son, this is probably an inappropriate story, I told my older son, "Hey, I'm not going to be back till 8 o'clock. Go hang out with Taylor." And I got back, and Taylor was in the guest house with my older son, and they were drinking beers. And my son had cracked a second beer, which he's a pretty light drinker. Taylor had drunk a ton. And he was freaking out about how many poets I brought here. And he was upset, like mock anger, that I didn't have a guest book so I could see all the names, right? The signatures. And yeah, I dropped that ball. Well, then he decided he should sign the wall of my guest house. I didn't want him to do that, but he made me go get a Sharpie so he could do it. And Taylor, shortly after, he spent the whole weekend trying to impress me, and he did. And shortly after that, he sent me this new book of his. It's called Late Father. And in the inside, he wrote, "For Jeff Johnson, the finishing touches were put on this book in your guest house. The color photo on the back flap was taken in front of your trees. Taylor Molly." And these are my personal trees behind him. And it's called Late Father because Taylor married a younger woman and started up a new life, and he had to do that because in the early aughts, his other wife, lost a battle with depression one morning in Brooklyn, New York, and instead of getting up and going to teach her first graders, she sat on the windowsill of their apartment and then just stepped out into thin air, man, and flew her way to heaven. Here's Taylor Molly.
Have you ever seen a Viking ship made out of popsicle sticks and balsa wood? Coils of brown thread for the ropes, oars made out of, what are those? Chopsticks. And an authentic red and yellow striped Viking sail made from a ripped piece of a baby's footy pajamas? I have. He died with his sword in his hand and so went straight to heaven. The Vikings often buried their bravest warriors in ships or set them adrift and on fire, a floating island of flame, the soul of the brave warrior rising slowly with the smoke. In order to understand life in Scandinavia during the time of the Middle Ages, you have to understand the Viking ship. So here's what I want the class to do. I want you all to build me 1 miniature Viking ship. You can use whatever materials you want. You've got 6 weeks to complete this assignment, but you have to work together like warriors. These are the projects that I am known for as a history teacher, like the Greek Shield Project, or the Marshmallow Catapult Project, or the Medieval Castle of Chocolate Cake. Actually, that one was a disaster. But there was the Egyptian Pyramid Project. Have you ever seen a family of 4 gathered around a card table after dinner, each member of the family holding on to one triangular side of a miniature cardboard Egyptian pyramid until the glue finally dried? I haven't either. But Mrs. Steinberg said that even with the little brother on one side saying, "This is a stupid pyramid, Tony. If I get Mr. Molly next year, my pyramid's going to be so much better designed than this piece of..." And Tony on the other side going, "Shut up, you stupid idiot. If you let go before the glue dries, I will disembowel you with your Sony PlayStation." It was the best family time that they had spent together since Hanukkah. He died with his sword in his hand and so went straight to heaven. Mr. Molly, if that's true, if a Viking died with his sword in his hand, he went straight to Valhalla, then if you were like an old Viking and you were going to die of old age, could you keep your sword right by your bed so if you ever felt like, "Uh-oh, I might die of old age," you could reach out and grab it and still go to heaven? Could you do that? If I were a Viking god, I don't think I would fall for that. But if I were an old Viking about to die of old age, that's exactly what I would do. You're a genius. He died with his sword in his hand and so went straight to heaven. Tony Steinberg had been missing from school for 2 months before we finally found out what was wrong. And then the 12 other boys in the class whispered the name of the disease as if you could catch it from saying it too loud. We'd been warned. The head of the middle school had come to class and said, "Tony is going to try to come to school on Friday for a visit, but he's had a rough time. The medication he's taking has made all of his hair fall out, so nobody stare, nobody point, nobody laugh." I always said that I liked teaching in a private school because I could talk about God in the classroom and not be breaking the law. And I like talking about God in the classroom. I do it a lot. Yes, in history class, that's easy. Even the Egyptian Pyramid Project is essentially a spiritual undertaking. But how can you teach math and not believe in a God of perfect geometric space and time, surrounded by archangels and right angles of varying degrees? Such a God would not give cancer to a 7th grade boy, would not make all of his hair fall out from chemotherapy, totally bald, in a jacket and tie, and I don't just mean Tony Steinberg. Not one single kid in my class had hair that day. The other 12 had all shaved their heads in solidarity. Have you ever seen 13 bald-headed 7th graders in jackets and ties, all of them staring at each other, all of them pointing, all of them laughing? I have. And it's a beautiful sight. Almost as striking as 12 7th grade boys 1 month later, standing in a circle outside the synagogue after the memorial service, heads bowed, holding hands, surrounding the smoldering remains of the class's miniature Viking ship, which they have set on fire. The soul of the brave warrior rising slowly with the smoke. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So again, like I said, just a really quick, compressed version of this presentation that I've been giving for a number of years. It's not important that I be in the screen with you. I hope I'm recording this properly, but I'm showing you here some lines of poetry that come from Hesiod, who made his verses 8 centuries before Christ lived. He was a Boeotian poet in Mycenae. And he's the first guy who mentioned, I've already mentioned his name in teaching you some rhetoric stuff, right? That word kairos, which means right timing and proper measure, that's the dude who gives us that idea. And here we have a line letting us know, you only get so much time, whether you're a procrastinator or not. I've been giving, because all I think about is literature, I've been giving some literary examples of characters who just couldn't do stuff on time, who delayed, who procrastinated. This is a very famous painting of Achilles, who was insulted at the beginning of the Iliad because Agamemnon takes away his slave girl on the beach, just humiliates him, and he's so upset that he sulks for almost the entire Iliad in his tent, 16,000 lines almost before his boyfriend Patroclus gets killed, and that gets him upset, and he finally comes out of the tent and fights, and here he's depicted dragging Hector, a good man, a Trojan, defending a burning city whose doom was already known to him. And later he sells the dead man's body to his dad, the king. Not a charming plot. Odysseus in the Odyssey is also a procrastinator. He's trying to get home after the Trojan War, but it takes him a while, doesn't it? It takes him years. For a while he gets stuck on an island in the seafaring business of it with a nymph named Kirke, who gives him everything he needs, if you know what I'm talking about. Hint, hint, wink, wink, say no more. Only after a while does Odysseus realize, my goodness, I got to get home. I got to get home over the long sea salt streams and get back to my wife Penelope and my son Telemachus. Here's another procrastinator as depicted in the Bhagavad Gita, the second most popular book on earth. The Gita is part of the Mahabharata, which is a large corpus of stories, an endless corpus of stories. And what you see sort of as a supplicant here on the left is Arjuna. And at the beginning of this story, Arjuna looks up and sees two extraordinary armies about to do battle under the hot sun. He sees cousins, opposing cousins, and he throws his bow and arrow into the dirt, and he just decides, I'm not fighting. I don't want to do it. And Krishna, a god, appears in the body of a human being, and they start having this really long conversation about integrity and courage and virtue. And in the end, he picks up the fight. Near the end of the story, Arjuna says, I want to see you as you are. I want to see you as a god. And Krishna says, you do not want that, dude. You're not ready for that. Arjuna says, I am. And Krishna, in that moment, explodes into endless eyeballs, right? That's a freaky idea. I know we're not all believers. Many of us are unbelievers. But if your head and heart are structured like mine, you have a Savior. And some of us know that even Jesus was a procrastinator the night before his passion in the Garden of Gethsemane, thinking of the stars and his friends that he would miss and the smells of the carpentry shop. He looked up to the heavens and asked if the cup could be passed by him. And we all know that it wasn't, that the skies were silent. In my religion, sloth or procrastination are actually sinful. There's a technical term for it. And Dante, in Dante's Inferno, knew that. That's why it was one of the 7 deadly sins. Sloth can also be called acedia, which is a kind of fatigue. It's an exhaustion, a boringness, being bored by all things spiritual. The church fathers and the desert fathers, as we call them, they called it the noonday demon because it would get you in the middle of the day when it was hot, when you were tired. And I'm actually afraid of it. I think it's one of the most deadly sins of all. And we have 2 competing legends, Faust and Faustus, in the German and the English tradition. And I'll spare you the details, but in both versions, there's these dudes, these doctors. Dr. Faustus is in his study and he's bored by everything, man. Maybe he is acedia. He doesn't want to read any books anymore. Not chemistry, not physics, not theology, not literature. And when he proclaims how bored he is, Mephistopheles occurs, one of the great demons of the netherworld, and says, hey, how'd you like to have 20 years to have complete, total power? I'll give you 20 years. You can do whatever you want. Magic powers. And the Faust says, that sounds like a pretty good idea. What do I have to do? And he's told, well, you got to sell me your soul. And he does. Both versions, Dr. Faust and Faustus, spike their arm and sign a contract for a deed in blood. And of course, both want out of it, man, when they run out of time. There's 1 minute to midnight. In the English version, Christopher Marlowe's version, that Faustus is torn asunder by demons and dragged off to hell. But the German version by Goethe, which is far finer, he's saved at the end by angels, and he's okay. Biggest procrastinator of all, without a doubt, in literature is Hamlet. Hamlet is like any university student, pretty rough Christmas break, comes home and finds out that his uncle has killed his dad and married his mom. It happened so fast in one day that at the wedding they're eating the leftover food from the funeral. It takes Hamlet thousands of lines, hundreds and hundreds of lines before he's going to do something. And he picks up a sword and kills the wrong guy. And maybe you know those lines. To be or not to be. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and an opposing end them. He's thinking about killing himself. Let's skip this definition. Let's skip the proof that I was once cute. And let me get to, I think, the one thing that could get you in a lot of trouble. Emily Dickinson correctly proclaimed that loneliness is a horror not to be surveyed. I think that a lot of students get in trouble with time and with procrastination because they don't get help. Don't delay in getting help. I know at Riverland, I know at Long Prairie Grey Eagle, and I certainly know at Central Lakes College that there's all kinds of ways to get help. Get help from your teachers. Get help from the tutors and whatever learning commons you have. If you're sad or scared, call me, write me, or go see a counselor. If you need financial aid, get financial aid once you start needing to pay for school. I think the number one thing that gets people in trouble is a monster that is one of my nemesis on this planet, and that's loneliness. That is solitude. And you mustn't let that happen. You must not. You have to look after yourself, and we have to look after each other. And I think probably the main thing I want to say about this, and I know we're a long way from English maybe, but we're not very far from life when we're talking about the fact that it's short. You only get so many heartbeats. You only get so many hours. And I think the reason, this is a dramatic thought, I think most people find at the end of their lives regret. They regret their lives because they wasted their lives doing things that were unbecoming and a waste of time. If you can get this thought installed into your consciousness and realize that you have an absolutely endless, solemn obligation to live a life that has purpose and meaning, you'll beat it. And keep these questions before you. Why is there pain? Why is there death? Why evil? Why is life worth living? What is the ultimate meaning of reality, of existence? Where did I come from? Where am I going? What sense does it make to work, to love, to become involved in the world? Well, it makes every sense in the world because life is good, you guys. Life is good. And these are the quotes of a man who once had the name Bergoglio, and right now it's changed it when he became the Pope. This is Pope Francis from a book that's precious to me about a theologian named Luigi Giussani that you've never heard of and will never hear of again. So this is the old jazz album, goes by Joe Beck. Watch the time. See you next time out.